Visual description. A Zoom recording with two people spotlit. Ōshin Jennings Sensei, a white man in his early 40s wearing monk's robes and an okesa, is sitting in front of a light tan screen. Tess Wenderski, a white femme-presenting person in their late 20s with brown hair and wearing a gray top and blue cardigan, is seated in front of a gray background. Ōshin is speaking and Tess is using ASL.
Good morning. It's good to be back with you. As many of you know, I had a back surgery a couple of weeks ago, so I'm finding myself still in that recovery phase, enjoying learning and engaging my body in a new way, enjoying being open to what's there. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about a koan, a teaching story from our tradition. It's case number 11 from the Blue Cliff record, Huang Gobblers of Dregs. It's a really interesting title. Gobblers of Dregs. The case goes like this. Huang Po, instructing the community, said, "All of you people are gobblers of dregs. If you go on traveling this way, where will you have today? Do you know that there are no teachers of Chan in all of China?" At that time, a monk came forward and said, "What about those in various places who order followers and lead communities?" Huang Po said, "I do not say there is no Chan, just that there are no teachers." So, it's an interesting story. I like to try and weave together a lot of times things from our community's practice life, our life, our shared life together. At Jikoji, we call this sometimes teaching from the breakfast table because we all have breakfast together. That's one of the traditions. So even if the residents that live there at Jikoji, they have maybe a job or they have other duties during the day, we'll at least all come together and have breakfast. And of course, there's always really fascinating conversations that happen at the breakfast table. And we get to be in community together. This really intimate way. Cooking, washing pans, pass the salt. Hey, how was that job interview last week? You know, this kind of thing. And it all kind of gets woven together sometimes. So we were recently talking about that. So, Gobblers of Dregs. And so, Gobblers of Dregs. What an odd phrase in English. Feels very antiquated and odd, and even in English. So I couldn't resist. I had to have a deep dive into what is this phrase? Where did we get this? Well, apparently it appeared as part of an English translation, and then everybody used it. Everybody really, I guess, really liked this as an English translation as part of this koan. But the original Chinese is really interesting because it's more like you're slurping down the last of someone else's wine, with the implication of instead of drinking from your own cup, you know. We also have this expression about the inch of tea sometimes. It's the last little bitter end of the tea that we leave in our cup, right? That inch of tea that we leave in the bottom of our cup. And and then if you're me, you might even go further and leave your cup somewhere. And so we can have this little bit of thing we might be missing, turning our gaze away from, or not engaging. Yeah. So koans, as you all know, are really what the old masters thought was worth discussing, what was worth meditating on, what was worth examining in our practice. So these teaching stories aren't stories that way, of course, because they're not following a story logic, thankfully. They're designed to cut deeper and go beyond logic, really, kind of, if you will, kind of go beyond how we usually engage our lives and our world. Gives us a little bit of a different view, or helps us knock it on its head, or gets us off balance enough that allows us to enter with renewed intimacy. And koans are also beautiful. There are also these really beautiful stories that touch part of this and what it is to be human. So we have all these stories from the Indian, but mostly from the Chinese and Japanese masters. And they're often humorous. And what's fun is sometimes they often will reference even older stories that we may know about, or even those older stories, we've lost those, so we don't really know the complete reference. But as humans, as feeling, thinking beings, these symbols, these stories, are a way in which we can share a language about our practice and about our life. You know? But sometimes, yeah, these symbols need a little interpretation. Gobblers of Dregs, what the heck is this about? But no matter what, it seems that koans have this incredible power. Incredible subtle power. So what is this one saying? It says, there are no Zen teachers. Right? That's one of the things it says. And well, what is Ōshin doing? What is he doing with all of this stuff? And sitting in this seat, with this title of guiding teacher or resident teacher. Then what is he doing if not teaching? It's right in his name. And I was thinking a lot about that when working with this koan, when preparing this talk. I was thinking about, why do we do this work? So I asked my co-teacher from Jikoji, I asked Nenzen Sensei about her opinions about, why do you do this work? What's it for you? What's it like for you over there? And we talked about it, and one of the things we both landed on is that we do this work so that we get to practice, which seems so silly. It's like we teach so that we get to practice, It's just what is happening right now. But it's also, we get to practice. We get to practice in community. And I love this community, and I love getting to work with all of you. So I love this close contact that we have. And that's the main interest of me as a teacher. Other teachers have different feelings and different interests and different emphasis. Sure. But I like it because it puts me in close contact with you. And it keeps me on point. It keeps me practicing. But one of the things that happened when I became a quote-unquote teacher is that a Japanese monk who was present for part of that ceremony, took a big look at all of this stuff and said, "Oh, now you're a student." And I understood, I would like to think I understood his meaning. Is to really take this on means not elevating oneself, but really kind of lowering oneself, and maybe elevating everything else, right? So it's a very hard position to occupy sometimes. And that's also something I am working with as a person. The guy in the ropes, the guy in this seat. It has very little to do with me, but I'm still engaging with it and working it. I'm saying, oh, now I'm a student. Maybe even more so, right? But this also had me reflecting on the beginning of some of my Zen journey. And I remember being a very young practitioner in my early teenage years. And my teacher, my first teacher, who was a Chan monk, who was a Chinese Zen monk, maybe just like Huang. And he noticed in me the wobbly tendency there, in that area of my practice. And so one of the things he would do is he would poke me a little, sometimes actually poke me, and he would say, "Occupy where you stand." And that was a big phrase for me, my own little personal call on to practice for a while. And as a teenager, I left home pretty early too. And I remember being a young teenager and being on my own for the first time. And I was scared, right? And maybe I didn't even realize how scared I was. Or maybe how scared I should have been. But I had moved very far away to a very rural area of Washington State. And I remember it was my second night there. I had stepped outside into the evening air, and it was crystal clear. It was the first time the sky was clear, and I was there. And the mass of stars, the intensity of stars, the band of stars. I didn't realize you could actually see the Milky Way. You could actually see a band, a concentration of stars through our night sky. I thought it was something from a science book or something. And in that moment, being a teenager, feeling very alone, feeling very overwhelmed with a lot of the things that were going on in my life, I found myself looking up at the night sky and getting completely overwhelmed, and my knees buckled. My knees literally started to give way. It was just like a cartoon or something. And I literally had to go to the ground as my knees kind of gave way. And I found myself as this lanky lump of a teenager sitting on the grass, completely overwhelmed with my life. And the phrase that popped into my head was, "Occupy where you stand." And I thought, I can't even stand. It was a very powerful feeling. And as clear as a bell, like ringing from the back of my mind, I just thought, well, then occupy where you sit. Just be a lanky, scared teenager lying in the dewy grass, absolutely having his head blown open by the stars. Can you be that here and now? Yeah, maybe a little bit more. Occupy where you sit. All of a sudden, I was invited into this greater intimacy with myself, my experience, my surroundings, and what was really going on. So, this is making me think a little bit of one of our kind of lineage founders, almost, if you will, Koro Sawaki. This teacher was called Homeless Kodo often in his life, because he practiced from place to place, and he never really had a temple of his own for much of his life. He just went from place to place teaching. I was like, where did Homeless Kodo occupy? But one of the qualities that strikes me deeply about Kodo is seemingly he practiced very much from within. And another thing is, he never took the teacher's seat. At first, for the first, I think, few years of practice, when he assumed the teaching role, he would never assume the teacher's seat. He would quite often meditate with the monks, just on the regular monk seats, and he would meditate facing the wall, and not turned facing inward, facing the rest of the room, as a brown robe, as a teacher usually does. He would just sit with everybody else. It's an interesting thing, because he was also saying, sure, I'll be your teacher, or whatever that is. But I'm not going to be watching you. You know? I'm not going to sit here in this seat like a hawk and look out into the Zendo. You know? So it'd be like if I had my Zoom screen and I said, "Okay, I'm gonna turn. I'll have my camera on, but I won't look at you. You should have your camera on too, but I won't look at you. You know? I'm never gonna look at you. I'm just never gonna look at you. I just want you to mind your own practice, to really, fully be the one with your hands on the steering wheel here. Don't give up that power to me. No. But eventually, yes. Eventually, we have to learn to, occupy where we stand. So, Kodo's position was his teacher. And so I think, in a way, he also found his own footing in that, his own way to stand up in that space. To have full intimacy with whatever position we're in. So taking the position of teacher was never something I really, of course, not something I aimed for. As a matter of fact, something at times I felt like I didn't want. Because it's hard. And part of me is just like, hey, wouldn't it be really nice to be a hermit monk instead? Wouldn't it be really nice to live over there in a little hut? Or just if my practice just had to concern me, and my practice didn't have to concern anybody else. That sounds kind of nice, you know. But that's our job. It's to teach this. It's to teach the nothing to teach. Nothing that I can teach you other than your own life, right? And that's what this koan is pointing us to. There's nothing to teach you here but your own life. Why are you going after the inch of tea, you know? Rentai put down his mug with an inch of cold coffee in the bottom. Don't go running around trying to sit that up. That's not what we're talking about. So I do actually, I don't want to sound like I hate my job or something. One of these people who's just kind of like, no, I mean, I love it. I really do. But it doesn't mean it's not challenging. And it doesn't mean it doesn't come with a lot of like personal exposure to it. But when I use my life and I teach from my life, it's never because it's about me, about my life. It's just the only thing I know how to teach from. So thank God we have these teaching stories. Or, hey, what Erica did last week was really smart. It really helped me open to myself a little more here. I like that. I like what she did there. Let's write this down. Yeah. And then it becomes this whole tradition. So it's really fascinating. So that's what it is. It's an invitation always to a greater intimacy with ourselves. So we're looking at all these abstract concepts, teachers from 800, 1200 years ago, stories about, these odd objects and these strange clothes. And it's nothing other than our life, So I wanted to also say a little something here about Huang. I'll share a little image here. Let's see if I can get our great master Huang up. All right. Yeah. And to visually describe, I just shared an image that's a line art drawing of a portrait of a monk in robes holding a whisk. Above and to the side of him is a bunch of Chinese writing, and this figure has a stubbily shaved head and a very large lump or knot in the middle of his forehead. So that's a little classic picture of what somebody thought Huang Bo might look like. But what I like about it is he's almost always depicted with this big lump. I mean, in that picture, it almost looked like half an orange, sized, maybe and in other sources, it'll say it's more like a callus on his head. And Huang Bo, yeah, he was over 2 meters tall. So, I had to think about medieval China having somebody who's 6.5 feet tall. That's pretty intense. So I think he probably cut a striking figure. When you saw Huang Bo, he was a very tall monk, and he had this knot on his forehead, And they would call it in Chinese. Sometimes they call it a pearl, which is to make a lump sound more appealing, maybe. As a pearl. They think of it very much as like this emanation of wisdom, It's kind of like boop coming out of his head. But it's said it was actually more like a callus that he received from his bowing practice. Yeah. Yeah. So, isn't a knot on your forehead also, a knot, a callus from prostrating? Isn't that also an emanation of wisdom? To get down low and to bow. To lower yourself as low as your body allows. And bow. So, do you know the Latin word for earth? It's humus. 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 Yeah. We get the word human from humus, of the earth. But we also get the word humility, too. Humble. Human. To be human is to be from the earth, to be drawn down to it, and to be in touch with it, to be in touch with our nature. Yeah? Down here. Down here. So in Zen, we have a few of these figures, like Huang, these towering figures. But sometimes they weren't. Quite often, they were also just little bitty old nuns, right? Who just swept the steps, offered kindness, little bits of wisdom. Like a lot of our book club study text, right? All of these stories of amazing women. But then we also have these larger-than-life figures, Huang, who shouted at their communities. Like, don't you be a gobbler of dregs. I love our tradition that honors all of these voices, you know, the subtle and quiet, and the strange, the loud. Doesn't matter. As long as that voice was helping awaken somebody, doesn't matter. So yes, sometimes they sounded strange, because sometimes when we use our full self like that, it sounds strange. Sometimes they're very unique. It can't be very unique. Sometimes they were unique. Sometimes they were very ordinary. Don't get caught on their unique qualities. Don't be gobblers of dregs. So yes, in our tradition, we do less shouting now. We do less hitting, we do less of this. But Master Obaku, Master Huang Bo, he was just pointing us back into our own lives. Don't copy. Don't just follow. Go deep into your own life, where the wisdom is. Be intimate with your life, not the scraps and leftovers of others. And the funny thing is, we're always kind of reaching, right? We're reaching for that cup, that pot out there, that spiritual thing to fill us up. Outside of us, over there, trying to fill me up. And so we end up saying things like, I'm doing this because I'm trying to be the best parent I can be. I'm trying to be the best partner I can be. Or I'm trying to be the best at work. And we don't even realize the more and more that we reach and we grasp, the more that we reach outside of ourselves, the more that we think with that small mind and that small perspective, more and more we rely on that, we actually miss our life. Because we're reaching outside of it. So for many of us, there's a time that's important in our lives where we have to drop that story. We have to drop the story about ourselves. And sometimes it's a story that we're carrying that's not even ours. It's a story that others have for us. So we release that. Because we find that it's very extra to living our life. We just don't need it anymore. Yeah? And when we do that, we find that we're drinking from our own cup. Yeah? Not just going after the scraps that others have left. Not looking into their cup and their bowl and saying, oh, what should my life be like? Huh? I look in Justin's bowl and say, what should my life be like, Justin? It just doesn't make sense. So each of us at some point has to find our own path. We have to occupy where we stand. And it's not easy. But we know, especially in the Zen tradition, we talk about it, it starts with letting go. Just kind of releasing it a little bit more. You know? Can you let yourself happen? What would that be like? To get out of your own way and let yourself happen. Can you just be a lanky teenager who's just turned 15 years old and doesn't know what to do next? Can you just be that? If that's what you are. So the more we practice like this, the more we develop this trust, this faith in our life and ourselves. I had a man come to Jikoji recently while I was there. He had lost his job after 25 years. He knew he was going to be made redundant, and so he decided, I'm going to take all of the time off I have left, all of my sick leave, all my paid, I'm just going to use it all. So, the whole week, up until leading to his last week of work, it was 2 months. He decided he was going to take 2 months off. It's mine. I earned it. Why not? So he took all this time off, and he also thought, well, I'm going to use this time to figure out what I'm going to do next. And you know what happened? After 60 days vacation, all of a sudden he found himself in his last week of work, and he had no idea what he was going to do next. And there came the last day, and all of a sudden he couldn't do it. So he ran to the temple, and he said, I don't know what to do. I'm getting fired tomorrow. I don't know what to do. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I don't know what my life is. For almost 3 decades, I've worked in the same tech job, in a tech field. Old people in tech, they don't hire dinosaurs like me. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know. So I asked him, what do you want to do? And he couldn't answer. It's like he'd never considered it. What do I want to do? What do I want to do? What do I want to do? It's almost like he literally had to keep looking behind him. Like, what just happened? What do I want to do? So I shared with him this koan, a different koan, a different little story, that is a sweet little one that goes something like, if you're atop a 100-foot pole, standing on top, what do you do next? And we've talked about this, we've talked about this koan before. So what do you do next? At some point, you have to step off into thin air, into your life, right? And he said to me, it's always a step off a 100-foot pole. You know? It's always like this. And I said to him, yes, yes, yeah. Stay there. And then he said, it's always a 100-foot pole. Yes, it is. It's always a 100-foot pole. Every step you take into your life is a 100-foot pole. Getting up out of bed, putting your feet on the ground, making the cup of coffee, feeding the kitty. It's a 100-foot pole. Every time. He had it. I didn't need to say anything else to him. And you know what he said before he left? He said, I feel like now that the path has disappeared, I'm really on my path. I said, yeah. What a great teaching. So maybe I should write this down for us, This interaction, this back and forth, was great, really great. And I get to share it with you guys. And it's like, yeah, this is a great story. It's going to help us connect with that. Yeah. So that's what our practice is. It's why we practice Zazen. We practice to have that close, intimate relationship with ourself and ourself, the greater self. Homeless Kodo used to describe Zazen as just the self selfing the self. The self. Selfing the self, maybe, yeah. How do we sign that? And don't worry, if English isn't your first language, or you think that didn't make sense in English, or that doesn't make sense in ASL, you're right. You're right. Not in that way, at least, right? Because, as Homeless Kodo also said, this practice is not a search for enlightenment. It's the expression of enlightenment in daily life. Zen practice is not a search for enlightenment, but an expression of enlightenment in our daily life. So, we're just trying to do that, not miss our life. Not let the stories we have or the thoughts we have about what's happening or ourself or the little causes and conditions or someone else's expectations become my life. And you can find that you miss chamomile soap. You might miss it. You might miss the cardinal that we have that sits in the linden tree in the morning. How he hunts, how he fights, how he flirts, the light that comes through the trees. It's like the wind and the leaves have waited that long just to get to play with each other. Right? So if we keep doing that, missing our life like that, missing ourselves, so we can't keep doing that. The world needs us. The world needs you. We need you. We need you to be you. And that's what I needed to do when I first moved out west. I needed to learn who I was, and quick. Just turned 15 years old, just moved about 3,000 miles away from anybody I'd known, anybody I'd ever met. And I was lost almost in the vacuum of it, right? The enormity of it. And so I needed to put down the hurt of it so that I could move into, yes, here I am, and this is what I need to do. The jazz great Thelonious Monk, Thelonious Monk, Thelonious Monk, he said, a genius is a one who is most like himself. The genius is the one who's most like himself, themself, herself. Who's this person then? Who's that person that we're talking about? So when I teach beginning meditation instruction, one of the things I teach is also the forms. How do we practice together like this with these forms? When to bow, where to bow. And one of the first things I teach is, okay, first thing we do is we bow to our cushion and we sit down. It's the first thing you do. You bow to your cushion and you sit down. First we bow to our cushion, then we bow across from us, and then we sit down. That's the Soto way. Why first to our cushion and then across from us? It's our tradition, right? And I remember asking one of my early teachers, I said, why do we bow to our cushion? Can you see where I was getting caught? If you were the teacher, and I was just like young, Zen student, why do I bow to my cushion? Why am I bowing to my cushion? So I asked my teacher, I said, why do we bow to our cushion? Why do we bow to our seat? And he said, you bow to where Buddha sits. He was like, just like very natural. You bow where Buddha sits. Do you see? You bow where Buddha sits, and then you sit down. You see? It's like, okay. After a couple more decades of this, I'm going to start to get it. It's like, who is this person? Who are we bowing to? Who are we greeting when we bow like that? So that was a big thing for me. Occupy where you stand. Yeah? Also occupy where you sit. But also, a big teaching for me was letting my family be who they are. Letting my parents be who they are. Even if they weren't functional parents sometimes. I had to let my parents be who I didn't deserve. Do you get that? Let my family be who I didn't deserve. As if to say, this isn't what I've chosen. And moving into, maybe this isn't what I would have chosen for myself, but this is where I started. And those two concepts are so close but so different. There's an entry point in that crack, in that gap. This isn't what I would have chosen, but it's where I started. I had to release it to move forward into my life. So, when I look through all these Zen stories and I look through the koans for inspiration or to write a Dharma talk, for inspiration for Dharma talk, and I look at all of my favorite stories and all of my favorite figures in the Dharma, we're not perfect people. You know? Huike, 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 the second ancestor after Bodhidharma, he only had one arm. Senkan, Sengcan, he was the third ancestor after Huike, and he was a leper or had some debilitating infectious disease. We know this about that, you know. And I go through and I know all of these different, you know, Huang, the Platform Sutra, you know. He was illiterate. He was an illiterate woodcutter. Right? Every one of these figures that we revere in Zen, you know, had something going on. And some of my favorite characters had a lot going on. And then we think about characters like Huang, who was naturally gifted in Zen, in philosophy, they say, and was 7 feet tall. And I think, with his forehead, and I think, he must have had students that were so pulled into his orbit that were starting to emulate him, right? And then we also had, on top of that, we had all of this Zen and Buddhist culture in China that was ancestor worship and a lot about memorization. And so you got all these people copying and memorizing and going through, and he said, there are no teachers of Zen. You know, that's what he said. There are no teachers of Zen. And I think I understand maybe why he said that. Because we're all just people trying to figure that out. For ourselves. And in the process, we hope to be good and authentic. And maybe we can be a good and authentic teacher and support to somebody else too. That's it. As long as it keeps coming from that good and authentic place in ourselves, then it will reach others. And that's all you really have to worry about. So, as a Zen teacher, there's no teachers of Zen. As a Zen teacher, I hope this came from a good and authentic place in me. And I hope it reached you.